When you've been involved in anime discussion long enough, you hear certain ideas repeated so often that, even if you haven't personally investigated them, you just sort of take them for granted. And one of the most prevalent of these ideas is that Pokemon Best Wishes was complete trash. So, I decided to explore Best Wishes and see exactly why people dislike this series so much, instead of relying on hearsay and hazy memories of watching it in my youth. And my conclusion after the first 3 episodes is that it's actually pretty okay. And I want to talk about some of the ideas that led me to this conclusion. I do want to emphasize again that this is solely based on the first 3 episodes. This is a first impression, and pretty much anything could happen after that, but I do feel confident enough in this opening segment to brace for the long haul with this one. There are 2 general ideas that I want to convey in this video. First is a concept that I've been trying to highlight as much as possible in my other Pokemon videos, but is still very applicable here, that being the idea of the Pokemon anime as a non-monolithic series. Even though they are all technically part of the same story, each new generation of the anime seems to have a distinct flavor or genre that it attempts to center itself on. For example, Sun and Moon leans much harder into slice of life than any Pokemon series before it. It's much more so about the day-to-day lives of Ash and his friends, and how they grow in a more stable environment, than it is a grand adventure about exploring a huge region and training as hard as possible to be the very best. Which is probably the biggest reason why Sun and Moon is so divisive amongst fans. It alienated people who came to Pokemon for those competitive elements. And while I understand the frustration that these fans feel, for me this was ultimately a good decision, as it allowed Pokemon to explore concepts that would have otherwise dragged down a more battle-centric narrative and truly left an impact on me. On the flip side, you have something like Diamond and Pearl, which is probably the most battle-centric the anime has ever been. And again, while I understand that this is why so many people like it, it's also the root cause of why I think so poorly of it, and you can check out my video on that in the description. But basically, it ended up taking itself so seriously that the logical inconsistencies that have always been prevalent in the franchise were exacerbated to the point where I just wasn't having any fun watching it. With all that said, what tone is Best Wishes going for? Well, surprisingly, it's comedy. So far, this is far and away the funniest Pokemon series I've seen in terms of both the frequency with which humor is implemented and the intensity of that humor. In particular, the comedic timing and shot composition has been completely retooled for a more comedic style of writing. The best examples of this are basically any scene involving Oshawott, who is rapidly becoming my favorite part of this season solely on his comedic timing and immense personality. This comedic focus is a huge benefit in that the rules for how the story functions can bend a little more than usual in order to fit a more comedic angle. Which is very fortunate for Best Wishes, because there is a fuck ton of goofy ass shit that has happened in this series so far. Episode 3 has probably the most blaring example of this, where Team Rocket uses a magnet to pick up a Sandile. A Pokemon that is not a steel type and has no metal in its body whatsoever. It's so fucking bizarre that I can't even process the logic behind it. And yet, I'm not even that upset by it because A, it's so damn weird, and B, the story isn't taking itself super seriously. It's trying to be funny. Yes, it would have been better to have them capture the Pokemon in a way that actually made sense, but the comedic focus helps to draw my ire away from these kinds of moments. It's also entirely possible for the story to eventually evolve away from this style as more serious elements are added, but for where it's at right now, it definitely works. If this had happened in Diamond and Pearl, I probably would have dedicated a whole minute to mercilessly ragging on it in my video, because it would feel so out of place in the super serious story it was trying to tell. But Best Wishes just feels so much more relaxed, and the general angst has been replaced with more amicable and humorous character interactions. Which brings us to another major criticism people level against this series: Iris. Iris might be the most hated character in the Pokemon anime based on the general discussion I've observed from fans. Whiny, annoying, and constantly spewing a frustrating catchphrase. On the surface, it's pretty obvious why this character is so maligned by the community. These criticisms are certainly valid, but I think they've become significantly overblown, and, more importantly, have overshadowed why those traits exist. The reason Ash and Iris meet in the first place is because he mistook her hair for a Pokemon and beamed her in the head with a Pokeball. So obviously she's going to think he's a few monsters short of a full party. First impressions are pretty important because they instantly color your perspective of who someone is and affect how you perceive them going forward. Also, this version of Ash isn't exactly a brilliant tactician, so she's kinda right most of the time, which is probably my biggest story criticism so far, but that's for another video. Despite this, we can clearly see that Iris does like Ash to at least some degree, which is why she decides to help guide him around Unova. These ideas start to form more concretely in episode 2 when she admits to being impressed by Ash's attempts to save her Axew. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. There are also elements of her character that often feel a bit hypocritical. In any given scene, she will judge Ash for being childish, and within a matter of seconds also do something that could be perceived as childish, such as how she gets so excited and spastic over a Pikachu showing up in the Unova region. And this happens so often that viewing it as accidental is almost impossible. Again, because this is just a first impression, I can't comment on how deeply this contradiction is explored in the narrative at large, but I would certainly be interested in seeing whether the story draws attention to it for some strong developmental payoff. And then episode 3 happens, in which Ash attempts to save a group of Pokemon from a river of boiling water, and we get this scene. Satoshi, 無茶しすぎ. Instantly, Iris's character evolves from mildly annoying child to compassionate human being. Yes, she calls Ash childish an excessive amount of times, but now we can see that it comes from a place of genuine concern. She calls him childish because she thinks he can be better, going so far as to risk her own safety just to help him. Even though she's only been with Ash for less than 2 episodes, she has developed a real sense of trust and camaraderie with him. This character is so much more complex and interesting than she is generally portrayed by the fandom, and while I can't say for certain that she'll stay this way, I am confident that the writing for this series will at least attempt to keep her as engaging and interesting as she has been in these first few episodes. And because everything is couched in a more comedic mindset where everything isn't overly serious all the time, I feel like there's actually a chance that I'll make it all the way through Best Wishes. Now, if only the animation didn't look like dog shit, cause goddamn, this looks fucking stupid. I will definitely be doing a full analysis of this series at some point, whether it's good or bad, but I wanted to get this part out there right now because my first impression was so strong and so wildly different from how the series was portrayed, and I encourage you to give it a shot just to see what you think of it. You know, there's nothing quite like covering an underrated piece of media and just gushing about it for a few minutes, so I think I'll make that a theme for the upcoming videos on my channel. Like, you know, I thought I was gonna have to cover that awful looking Mewtwo Strikes Back reboot, but the Pokemon Company didn't even bring it over to theaters here. They fucking dropped that thing, so I don't even have to bother reviewing it. But I'm getting off topic now, because what I really want to cover now is what I think is the most underrated part of the Pokemon franchise. God damn it. Hold on. I gotta take this. Hello? Wait, hold on. What? You're saying they did bring the Mewtwo reboot over? They just shoved it onto Netflix with barely any fanfare, like kicking a cheap hooker out of your car after a disappointing blowjob? Okay. So, slight change of plans. Apparently they did bring the Mewtwo reboot over, so I guess I'll be covering that next.
still kind of confused as to why we needed a Mewtwo reboot in the first place. But hey, I literally just did a video on best wishes and how it's not as bad as people make it out to be, so maybe I'll be surprised by this movie. I mean, how bad could it be?
Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourke Tenjoin, Christine Seibert, Ryan Johnson, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.